Hi everyone, it's William on another overcast day. It is here in the year 2025, May 25th. This is the Grand Duke Dmitri 1939 diary series. I'm back out on the balcony of room 109, and we are up to part 3 of the long, well, not so long, a medium-sized, let's say, letter that Dmitri wrote to his sister Maria on the 27th of October, 1939, and he would have been 2 floors up from where I am now, but he would not have been, I think, writing his letter on the balcony. Maybe, I didn't look up that date in the diaries to see what the weather was like, but he was such a sun lover. I didn't think he would have cared to be sitting outside on a day like today. So what's our recap for the previous section of the letter? Well, it was a discussion of Polly's situation, and the question of whether he would feel abandoned and if he would be lonelier in England during the war than he had been before the war. And Dmitri was saying, no, he wouldn't be. We didn't see him during the school year anyway, except for holidays and 1 or 2 Sundays, and that the war isn't going to be an issue where he's at in Ascot in England. And yeah, we were introduced to Nanny Hickling, Polly's nanny, and we were told a little something about Audrey's difficulties in Europe, that she herself, well, Dmitri mainly talks about how her new husband, Dmitri Georgiadze, had some kind of issues with being in France. He wasn't allowed to be in France, so they couldn't live there. Okay, so he ends it by saying, remember our going to Moscow, as a way to remind Maria that it wasn't easy for a child to be uprooted from the place that he had known and sent to another place. And Polly was 12, so he was a little older, well, really close to the same age, but a little older than Dmitri was when Dmitri and Maria were sent to live in Moscow. Okay, our cast today is just Polly, although this section of the letter is not really about Polly. It mentions him, of course. It's about a whole other topic that Maria clearly brought up about the political situation. And she and Dmitri apparently disagree on that to a certain extent. Okay, so here we go. Now 2 words about myself. It is all very well to jump to political conclusions, ! It's all very well to see the anti-English feeling grow, ! Still, perhaps the old tradition of life, wisely changed toward new demands, new ideas, a possible blend between the London tradition and the Italian aspirations, would perhaps in future build up something possible and lasting! It's all very well to keep in our heart some feeling about what is taking place in Moscow, and then he puts in parentheses the Peter the Great tradition! But, hélas, it's a new red tradition, new red ideas of armed workmen, imprisoned landlords, shot bishops, burned churches, etc! One of the Swiss papers had a very interesting small zamietka from a correspondent in Poland. Zamietka means just item, and recall that he's writing this in English, but he interjects, he puts that Russian word in. So one of the Swiss papers had a very interesting small zamietka from a correspondent in Poland. He writes that Moscow's propaganda calls the Russian troops the liberators of Poland, and that the liberators, to their surprise, saw in entering Poland that the people whom they came to liberate were much better off than the people in Russia! The same in the blank news. I can't make out the word, so some other country's news that he is hearing or reading. I know that you will understand me when I will say that I have a sort of strong, very strong patriotism of Europe, be it London, Paris, Berlin, Rome. To be in America during these times would be awful. To read in the morning papers about this drama, and in the evening to go out for dinner all along Park Avenue and later perhaps going to Palm Beach. No! Exclamation point. 100 times no! Exclamation point. No, just no. What shall I do if I get quite well in America? I go back to Europe right away, leaving Polly to become a little American boy with an awful way of talking. Triple exclamation point. If and when I get well in Europe, oh, that is a question. If I shall remain neutral, I must go to Greece. That is absolutely urgent, exclamation point, but perhaps I don't wish to be neutral. And then he puts 4 or actually 5 dots, ... and 2 question marks. So boy, I have so many questions about this one. I'll try not to ramble on too long. It's probably good that I'm standing out here where it's a little bit cold, so that will be a motivation to not talk too long and to go back inside. But yes, I have so many questions about this. So many things that I'd like to sit down with Dmitri himself and ask him to offer some clarification. I'm sure one of the reasons that Maria is expressing the political opinions that she is because she so much wants Dmitri to come to the U.S. But I don't think that's the only reason. I think, in fact, I would say from other future correspondence between the two of them that she was pretty anti-English. And Dmitri had a real love-hate relationship with England. We talked about that during the series on the 1921 diaries. But overall, he sort of had an English sensibility himself. People often mistook him for an Englishman. So his anti-English feelings are only ever going to go so far. Essentially, he is simpatico with the English idea. However one would have defined that. He tells her that she's jumping to political conclusions, and I wish I knew exactly to what he referred when he talked about the growth of anti-English feelings. Did he mean her anti-English feelings? Did he mean anti-English feelings in the United States? I think that's something we would have to ask him. Otherwise, we can't know for sure. So this is very typical of Dmitri to be looking toward the future. Even though he's well-grounded in the past, he belongs to a past that was steeped in tradition as a member of the Imperial Russian royal family. But he was kind of an anomaly in the family because he was, in a sense, not in the sense of the modernist school of thought, but he was a modernist. He wasn't a person who rejected modernity. And, in fact, he had the same notion when he was talking about, back in 1921, when he was still thinking, I may be the Russian Tsar someday, and talking about the fact that the monarchists who want to return to the old way of things, even that they're wrong, that even if we reestablish the monarchy in Russia, we're going to have to take some of the ideas that so much appealed to people, that the revolution had brought about. We're going to have to accept those, and we're going to have to build on those. And, he seems to kind of be saying the same thing here. We need, the future, it presents us with new demands, and we need to have new ideas. That would be wise. But it's a little more equivocal and a little more hard to understand when he's talking about these different things. So on the one hand, the London tradition. Well, I can't define the London tradition for you other than to say it's, and it was then as now, it was democratic. That wouldn't have been London per se. It would have been the entire UK. But, I guess, maybe he just means that it was, that London was the center. It was the center of the government. The Italian aspirations, that seems a little scarier, because there we're talking about fascism. And, there was then, as unfortunately now, a certain amount of sympathy with fascism. Not everybody liked the sort of racist element of it and the repressive element of it, but in a lot of instances it seemed like to people like a superior form of organization if they could overlook all these other little problems, ahem. But anyway, maybe he's naive about what's going on in Italy, and he's just thinking, oh, they say the trains are running on time now, so that's good, and let's combine that with the kind of monarchical democracy that they have in England. But that's me putting words in his mouth, because again, I would so much love to talk to him about that. And now he turns to Russia, which is very interesting indeed. He refers to, we've already had reference to the London tradition and the Italian aspirations. Now we hear about about Russia specifically in the context of the Peter the Great tradition. So what did that mean to Dmitri is the question. I mean, that's specifically what I was studying in my dissertation, was how the Peter the Great tradition, how Peter the Great's ethos transformed the service mentality in Russia, and how much of that was embraced by the imperial family itself, and how that led to sort of internal division within the imperial family, because Peter the Great was, even though he was, he believed in a strong centralized government, he was very forward-looking. He was very admiring of things that he saw that worked in Western Europe, and he was very much into the idea of everybody pitching in. In his case, it was compulsory, and turning Russia into a great power, that was his aspiration. And so is that what Dmitri means when he refers to the Peter the Great tradition? It's all very well, he says, to keep in our heart some feelings about what is taking place in Moscow, but alas, it's a new red tradition. And the things that he's now citing, these are things that he should have been writing about, decades ago. These are things that happened during the Civil War, in the early Soviet Union, they wanted to get rid of everything that was traditional. And so they literally, you had armed workmen, yes. You had imprisoned landlords, yes. You had bishops who were shot, churches that were burned. But were they doing this in 1939? Maybe, as an anomaly once in a while. But the thing that was going on in 39, of course, was the Stalinist purges, and you had the starvation of, the Ukrainian peasantry, but you weren't having, all the bishops that had needed to be shot had been shot, unfortunately, a long time ago, and now the bishops that you had were more or less in compliance with the Soviet state, and workmen couldn't take up arms against the government, and, there weren't any more landlords to imprison. Churches had been converted into other kinds of buildings. And so what's he talking about? He's way behind the times with these things that he's describing. And the funny thing about it is that when he'd now more or less left. I don't think he'd put in an official resignation. He might have, I don't think so. But he'd now more or less left Young Russia. And Young Russia, this party that he'd been so actively involved in and giving speeches for, was in its way pro-Soviet, overtly pro-Soviet, not in the sense that they absolutely wanted to restore monarchy to Russia, but they wanted it to be what they called a Soviet monarchy. And Dmitri had even given a speech saying we shouldn't disdain the things that Stalin has accomplished in Russia, because, we're Russian patriots, and any great accomplishments that occur in Russia are things we should be proud of. And he'd even been, accused of being a crypto-Bolshevik himself. Well, now he's rejecting all that, he's rejecting the new red tradition, and he's citing these things that happened that weren't happening anymore. So I don't understand what's going on with that. I honestly don't. But then from that we go into, let's see. Okay, I don't want to skip the part about Poland, because that again is very interesting. I don't know, I haven't researched this part of the Second World War that I can say what happened with the Soviets going into that part of Poland. But I will say that, so Dmitri read about this in a Swiss newspaper, and he's saying that the part of Poland that the Reds went into and took, that they were shocked that presenting themselves as liberators, excuse me, they were shocked to see that the sorry, I was a bit distracted, that the people in that part of Poland were living better than people were in the Soviet Union. And this reminds me of something that happened at a much earlier period of Russian history, under the imperial system, when the Decembrists, during the Napoleonic era, the Russian army had gone into other countries, into France, for instance, and they were victorious. But they looked around and they saw how much better people in these other countries were living. And so they came back, and the officers, you had this uprising called the Decembrist uprising, that came very close to overthrowing the regime of Nicholas I. And so, this is a similar thing, I suppose, if they get there and suddenly they're exposed to what life is like in another country, and they think, aha, how can we call ourselves liberators of them when they're doing better than we are? But of course, I don't know if the Nazis were established in that part of Poland. If they were, then I would say, absolutely, the Soviets could, relative to what they were doing, especially if you were Jewish, obviously, it was better to have the Soviets there. But, that's talking myself into a quagmire. Anyway, that is interesting. And it's interesting that earlier on, right after the revolution, when there were red troops, I should say, the Red Army went into Poland, and the Poles were resisting, and Dmitri was very much torn as to what he wanted the outcome of that to be, because on the one hand, he didn't want the Russian army, whether it was the Red Army or not, to be defeated by the Poles, but on the other hand, he didn't want the Bolsheviks to succeed. So that was a little difficult for him. Okay, so what do we come to next? It's interesting that when he refers to reading a Swiss newspaper, I think he's probably reading a French language Swiss newspaper. Okay, patriotism of Europe, very strong patriotism of Europe. Well, again, this is a change for him. Because before that, it was all about Russia. And now he's saying, forget it. I'm a patriot of Europe. You're not going to get me to the United States, Maria. And he cites 4 countries. Funnily enough, 2 of them are Axis countries and 2 of them are Allied countries. He cites the capital cities. So we have Berlin, London, Rome, and Paris. And, he's saying, this is where I feel at home. I feel at home in cosmopolitan cities in Europe. And, of course, that was not, when he says maybe I will choose sides, well, it's no longer going to be possible to be, even if he gets well. And he emphasizes that there's a big if with that. It's no longer going to be possible to be this cosmopolitan fellow who's dividing his time between those 4 cities. But he makes it clear that he would be unhappy specifically leading a frivolous life in the United States, going out to dinner, enjoying himself in Palm Beach, that he's so emphatic about that. No, just no. That, so let's give him credit for not wanting to react to what's going on by just shrugging his shoulders and leading a frivolous life. We don't know, of course, what he would have done if he hadn't had to go into a sanatorium. he's contemplating that. What am I going to do if I get well enough to leave? Well, he wasn't planning on going to Switzerland. He was planning on going to Greece. And of course, that would not have been a good solution, because Greece would be, invaded by Italy. And then when that didn't work out, by Germany. That was 1941, I believe. I should have looked that up. And so he would have been caught in the middle of all of that if he'd been well enough to go to Greece. Why Greece? I think it's because he had lots of family there, and he'd sort of renewed those ties, and he'd been in Greece in 1938, and he even had been talking to a fellow named Metaxas. And you had Metaxas, who was the leader of Greece. He was sort of a, let's say, a dictator. Sort of, I don't know. I shouldn't say he was a fascist, because I don't know if he was, but he was sort of a dictator. I don't know if this was the Metaxas whom Dmitri was meeting with and talking to when he was in Greece in 1938. Maybe yes, maybe no. Anyway, Greece he was considering as his foremost option. If he's going to stay neutral. Why he didn't want to stay in Switzerland, I don't know. That would seem to me to be a lot more convenient. But on the other hand, he had family. His mother had been a princess of Greece. Okay, maybe I won't stay neutral, he says. Well, that's interesting. Perhaps I don't wish to be neutral, is the way he puts it. Well, what does that mean? Again, we would have to talk to him about that. What does that mean? It's clear to me from the later diaries that, it's not just clear, it's 100% clear that he was not going to support the Axis. He was anti-Hitler. He preferred France to England, but again, the love-hate relationship with England. Anyway, what's interesting to me, because I've often wondered, Dmitri was so prone, as we saw in 1921, to these, when he got discouraged, he would fall into a deep depression, and he would kind of just withdraw and shrug his shoulders. And, now he's here in the sanatorium. He can't really do anything, and yet what's happened in the war has just revived all of these, all of this desire that he's always had to sort of be in the thick of things and to sort of be a person of consequence. And that seems to be kind of where he's heading. I don't know if he had in mind a specific role, but, he seems to be fired up about this, much more so than for a while. And so that of course is interesting. Next time, well, I'd said in the previous video that this time we were going to talk about his status as a stateless person, a person with a Nansen passport, but I didn't manage to get that far. So we'll be talking about that next time. I think I'll do a smaller section next time, and then we'll be going back to the whole issue of Polly, and which of course Dmitri can't get off his mind. And it's it's a shorter letter this time. So I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.